We are going to talk about accessibility in this conversation today with Brian and Josh. And if you guys don't know about accessibility, so 18th of May was a World Accessibility Day, and it usually falls on the third Thursday of every year. And accessibility is so essential component of the world we live in currently, and that's what we are going to get more wisdom on from Brian and Josh, and why accessibility is so important for the world we live in. So, Brian and Josh, I would ask you to give a quick introduction of yourselves and a short introduction of what InterAccess as an organization does in accessibility.
Okay, will I go first, Brian?
Go for it, Josh. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, thank you, Charul. Thank you very much for inviting us to talk on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and also to be able to talk about InterAccess and what we do and about accessibility in general. So briefly, I'm the director of InterAccess. I started the company about 7 years ago. We do accessibility auditing, testing involving people with disabilities in software development and design processes for our clients, and providing that kind of bridge, I guess, to help people with their conformance and their compliance, as well as developing quality real world, accessible experiences for people. Briefly, I've been doing accessibility, I guess, for about 20 odd years. I've worked for different organizations nationally who provide services for people with disabilities. And I've also been working in the area of web standards for many years too. So that's me.
That's great. Thanks, Josh. And Brian?
Thanks, Charul. Thanks for inviting us here, as Josh says. So I'm Brian Dalton. I'm the project manager with InterAccess. So I'm an accessibility test lead and a project manager. So I manage the various projects and the relationships with our clients that we have across a diverse portfolio of industries, from transport to financial to e-learning, many different industries. Not only that, but I'm also a user of assistive technology. So I'm a native screen reader as well. So I always say that I'm in a privileged position where I can comment and evaluate the end user experience, which is obviously critical for our customers, along with the conformance piece. And hopefully I can have an input into that as well to make that overall user experience the best it can be to the broadest audience possible. Because when we talk about accessibility, we're not just talking about people who use screen readers. We're talking about a diverse range of needs. So we've got people who obviously use screen readers. We've got people who rely on magnification software. We've got people who use speech input software, switches, and a whole raft of assistive technology to meet their user needs.
As a user myself, or as an employee, I got introduced to accessibility 5 years ago when I joined Workday. Became aware of accessibility of web and mobile, and I found this accessibility aspect very crucial. And and that's when I realized that it's so important for the digital side of the world to be very accessible. And once I got training into accessibility, I was able to find so many bugs in the system, and those issues could be disastrous for someone who might be using that system from probably a different walk of life.
Right. Okay, great stuff. Well, I take that, Brian.
Go for it, Josh. Yeah.
A lot of stuff there to unpick, and I'm really glad to hear what you said about understanding, the practical things that would have an impact on somebody with a disability when you were doing your mobile work and your mobile testing, right, and all of that kind of thing. And that is all really that's a good place to come at it from, because a lot of people approach accessibility from a compliance perspective. A lot of people first hear about accessibility about one more thing that they kind of have to do as a part of a policy that their organization has, or some kind of new conformance requirement. And many organizations are slammed with those kind of things now, whether it's GDPR or whether it's, security or privacy. And now we have accessibility, part of that kind of trinity, I guess, which, accessibility is up there with security and privacy in terms of importance. But I think that focus on the user and that focus on that personal practical experience for somebody there may be a barrier within a technology That's really where the good stuff is at. That's really where the focus should be. So I think understanding the user need, understanding why a user may have difficulty with the technology is a core part of it. Otherwise, the whole exercise for many organizations seems to be theoretical stroke academic stroke legislative or legalistic. And whereas those things are important, they're not the full picture. They're really only the drivers to get us all in the room. So to answer your first question, though, accessibility really is about giving people access to things and helping them to do things that they wouldn't be able to do. Essentially, accessibility as a discipline is around removing barriers in the environment for people with persistent issues around access. And I guess that's probably a good way of just briefly discussing it. Brian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's along similar lines, to be honest. But what I'd say is that most people have a fear around accessibility. Even when they hear the word, it conjures up fear in their minds. But it shouldn't really be about that. All accessibility really is offering an alternative solution to, as Josh says, to break down those barriers for people. So that one alternative solution can make something accessible and usable to a certain group of people, but it also fits a broader audience as well. So if you think of, I suppose, digital and physical accessibility, so physical accessibility could be providing a ramp into a building. That ramp can be used by everybody. It can be used by me as a wheelchair user, and it can be used by both of you who are fully able-bodied people. If you think of providing a transcript of a call or a meeting, that transcript is available to somebody who may be deaf, or it also is available to somebody who may be in a busy environment and can't actually hear the details of a meeting, but yet that transcript will be visible to them. If you think of label buttons on a website, that's usable to everybody. So if you're fully sighted and a button is accessible, you can still click on it with your mouse. Whereas if you're totally blind or a user with low vision, if that button is accessible, then you have the option to click on it with your keyboard as well and perform the same action. So if you make something accessible, it's going to be accessible to everybody, really. So there doesn't need to be that fear around it. It can be actually accomplished quite easy by just keeping it nice and simple.
Interesting. Josh and Brian, these are incredible information that you have shared. And just coming back to that point, Josh, that you've mentioned that a lot of organizations are doing it for their compliance or maybe for guidelines purposes, or maybe it's just built in air. But are we really understanding the user problem there? Do we have people or, maybe probably third-party organizations or maybe InterAccess to help with that user aspect, to help understand that problem, what the user is facing? Are we really considering that, or we are just ticking box on the guideline and compliance and not understanding the user needs?
Well, just on that, if I may, that's critical. That's a critical, and there is a difference in those two approaches, because you can design systems around conformance and compliance and ticking those boxes, or you can design systems around making things that work for the broadest range of users. And they're two very, very different approaches, And one thing just to say that came to mind when Brian, you were talking about alternatives, and I was thinking, well, actually the ramp that you're going to put there, for somebody who can use the wheelchair, or someone who has a shopping trolley full of stuff, or a pram. I mean, that's not even an alternative, right? That's actually the main solution that just works for everybody, because it's been designed with those kind of broad range of user needs in mind. And I think accessibility is, yes, about alternatives on one level, but it's also really about raising awareness and making the main, whether it's your digital platforms, making those things as accessible as possible. To the broadest range of users as well, so
Right. And also, Josh and Brian, from my own experience, I have found out that organizations themselves and their team members are not educated in accessibility. They don't know what it needs to make a practice fully accessible. People don't understand the concept of accessibility within a lot of organizations. And I think that's where organization like yours, InterAccess, can come in and help them probably educate and help these organizations understand more what it
Yeah.
needs to, I do see that there is a lack of wisdom on accessibility within the organizations. I'd say
But
that.
that's okay, Charul, as well. Just to say, like that's okay in one level, because you can't expect everybody to understand all these things in a very particularly deep way, right? So,
Okay.
you know, like we do help, as you say, we help our clients understand these user needs in a particular way, and we very much focus on that, and we help them with their conformance requirements. But we do hope along the way that they will end up with a deeper understanding of the user need. Because if you understand a user need clearly, if you understand the reason why you're doing something, then you can build requirements that are robust as an abstraction. Otherwise, they are leaky. To use a kind of,
Right.
you know,
I think
they
the
don't
whole,
work; they break down. Yeah.
Sure.
yeah,
And Josh
the
and
whole,
Brian, I also figure out why accessibility with, for example, an organization like Workday is a priority from the very start of a project. It's being built in. So
and
I
that's
think that
exactly where it has to
that
be,
that's
Cheryl. It
where it
really
has
has
to
to be
be.
considered right from the
Right.
get-go, you know, right from the vision
Yeah.
of a project. So when
Right.
you decide on what your
Yeah.
project's going to be, when
Yeah.
you're writing your project vision document, your
Right.
scope documents, that's
Yeah.
where accessibility needs to come in right from that
Definitely.
stage. And not only that then, but it needs to continue on through the life cycle of a product.
Sure.
So it comes in the project vision, it comes in the plans, it's considered in the analysis phase. Obviously, it's crucial in the design phase, the development phase, the testing phase, the resolution. It needs to be part and parcel of the whole process, in just the same way as Josh mentioned earlier on around data protection, privacy, security.
Definitely.
Accessibility is part of that stack as well.
Right, Brian. And that's something very important that we touched upon in this conversation, because that's what a lot of organizations need to understand, to consider accessibility as a key component of every task or every project they undertake. So, Josh and Brian, what all the stats that you might have seen recently, the work that's going on, what would you say? Would you like to throw some light on where we are at and where we are going as a country in accessibility aspect?
Yeah, I guess I wasn't sure if that was to me or Brian, but
Yeah.
where are we going? Well,
Yeah.
there have always been people in Ireland on the grassroots who have been interested in and involved in accessibility, which is something that's important in the public sector and in government. So, for it to work, we need champions, you know, people like your good self who are raising awareness and who are talking about accessibility within an organization. Like, you know, you're really crucial for the whole thing to really work. I think there's more of an awareness around accessibility as a discipline, and there's more of a focus on it right now as well as a thing, particularly because of the Web Accessibility Directive, which has been folded into Irish law, and now the European Accessibility Act as well, which is going to go beyond the public sector as well by 2025. A huge amount of commercial business are going to have accessible services under the directive, or under the Accessibility Act rather. So I think it's going to be getting better. I do think on some levels it's more complicated in some ways, because there are more frameworks, there are more tools for developers, there are more things to get wrong. And more ways of getting that wrong than there used to be. But the thing that I've always noticed, I guess, over the last few years is that the needs of people with disabilities don't really change. The technology will change, and the means how you may do something may change, but the actual need you're trying to address is fundamentally the same. And so I think this is why this focus on user needs and on that human and humane aspect of involving people in technology and in your user needs gathering phases and all of that is really important. Raising awareness around that diversity there. So, Brian, that's my own thoughts on that. What do you think?
Yeah, pretty similar, to be honest. We definitely do need champions or advocates, call them what you will, you know, leaders in this area. But I do think it's only really when somebody sees a user of assistive technology facing challenges with content that's the real eye opener.
Yeah.
So when we do audits for our clients, we make some videos of some of the issues that are faced by users of assistive technology. So it could be, for example, myself with a screen reader, somebody else with magnification software, and we'll demonstrate what that user need is and what the issue is. And it's really when they see that in action, that's when their eyes begin to open. When I got involved in accessibility way back when, over 20 years ago, I was doing some usability testing. Down with Josh, actually. That's where we connected. And Josh was facilitating the tests at the time. And I remember we'd test websites for public sector bodies. So there would be Josh who would be facilitating the test. There would be me who'd be carrying out the instructions, or people who use assistive technology. And I remember at various occasions, people from the organization would be observing the test as well and watching me using my screen reader to interact with the content. And I think it was at that moment and several moments of that nature that their eyes began to open and they really realized, you know, how accessible or inaccessible their content was. So I think it's so important for that awareness as well, that people see users of assistive technology using it out and about in the mainstream, for want of a better word. You know, when somebody sees me using an iPhone, for example, their eyes open. It's like, how do you use that? Well, I use it because it was designed with accessibility in mind.
Definitely.
I use it because it has a screen reader built in. I don't need to install anything. You know, my friends can use it because there's magnification software. Other friends can use it because of the assistive touch facilities that are on it. And it's only when they see it in action like that that the penny begins to drop. The simple things, to be honest with you, Charul, and they're quick wins. That's what we always try to say to our clients. You know, you can get many quick wins by keeping it simple and rectifying the simple things. So it could be, for example, like a login button is not labeled. So when you go to log into a site, that you can't actually log in because there's no accessible name on that button. It could be the fields on a form aren't accessible. So in other words, the user doesn't know what information is required in each field. It could be that a menu doesn't expand or collapse. It's often the very simple things which, if they're rectified, can make such a difference to the usability of some content.
So on that, sorry, before you move on, just I think one of the biggest challenges that this discipline faces is, I think, getting people to acknowledge their responsibility and the part that they have to play in making stuff accessible. And I think that comes from this idea that accessibility is something that's fixed or done by others, you know, and really it's kind of not. It's a team sport, and everybody who is creating content or who is, you know, dealing with touch points which the public are going to have to come in contact with has some part to play in identifying where their responsibility lies and what their role is. Because it's like an orchestra, really, you know, everyone has a part to play, an instrument to play to make the whole thing happen. You know, it's not just done in one place, not just done in the design team, not just done in the dev team, not just, it's up, and you know, when there's a top-down kind of cultural push from management to really take accessibility seriously and that kind of thing, that's really, really good. But then everyone needs to get on board. And because when the rubber hits the road, and where, you know, sprints are tight or projects are under deadlines, accessibility can get pushed out. But at the same time, we have to stop that. You don't want to release something which has got a ton of accessibility bugs, or in as much as you wouldn't if it had privacy or security bugs. They all have to be seen on a kind of a certain parity. Obviously, there's gradation, but just to comment on that, I think one of the challenges is getting people to identify their role and take responsibility for their part, you know.
It goes deeper than that as well, Charul, and Josh is absolutely right. Like, everyone needs to play their part and be responsible, but it needs to be embedded right into the culture of an organization as well.
Absolutely.
To have that knock-on effect.
Absolutely similar to D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has to be a key component. Accessibility must be a key component there. Since inception, 7 years ago, what evolution have you seen, or what impact you have seen happening in this stage, and where are you heading next? what is the next, near short term or long term vision looks like, because vision evolves, and in accessibility we are learning each day. There are new tools, new solutions are coming up now as world is getting more aware of on this aspect.
I see us continuing to do what we do. I mean, we bring a lot of experience to the table in terms of the knowledge that we have and the skills that we have, but we have to we also keep fresh. I mean, for example, it's important to stay fresh with technology.
Sure.
Technology is always changing. There's move towards new platforms, new tools, new environments. And many of them have particular accessibility challenges or particular opportunities from an accessibility perspective. If you look at, for example, immersive environments, XR type environments, those kind of things that are happening, probably beyond the scope of this conversation. But I think, we'll continue to do what we do and rock on. And, I think good accessibility is really a product of good design and good development. So it's really a byproduct of those things, in as much as bad design and bad code will produce stuff that's inaccessible or unusable, but how does that actually happen? How does that really happen? Ultimately, it happens really because people make certain choices and they don't understand the impact that those choices can have. So really what we're doing is a lot of the time is helping developers and designers be better at their jobs. And making people who are creating content be more aware of how, that can impact on somebody, for example. And it's often simple things like for even looking at text content, making content more understandable to people with particular reading ability, simple, clear language, not using technical jargon when it can be avoided. There's many of the things that we need that were good 20 years ago are good now and will be good in the future, So I think that's it. So we'll just continue to do that. We don't really have a grand plan, so we'll just keep rocking on. Yeah.
I think to push the whole notion of awareness and keeping the focus on awareness of accessibility strong is really good. And that's come on a lot, in terms of the different services that InterAccess now offer. We've got our whole training module for teams of people or individuals to come in and learn about, designing for accessibility, developing for accessibility, testing for accessibility, understanding the user needs. We've got our usability testing service, which is now out there as well, where, we can do some usability testing for our clients, bring in, as Josh says, real users who use the technology in their lives every day, to test content for clients as well in their own home. It can all be done remotely. So that's, again, keeping that focus on awareness and trying to educate people.
Absolutely, Brian. Brian, I just have one more question. Sure. Is that, so now we see that the technology has evolved so much and we have tools to test for accessibility as well, maybe more advanced tools to test for accessibility. But the question here goes is that those tools that teams are using, are those tools accessible in order to achieve accessibility? What do you think about it? That's it is a really good question. So obviously, here at InterAccess, we do a range of manual testing. So we would use assistive technology, screen readers, magnification. They're all fine. They're accessible because, they need to be. But what I have found is, so there's automate tools as well that can be used to test content. And the accessibility of some of those tools is flaky and leaves a lot to be desired, for want of a better word. As a screen reader user, I haven't been able to use them totally independent to test content. So they vary in range, to be quite honest. So while a lot of them are designed with accessibility and for accessibility, there's such a big difference between making something accessible and making it usable. And I think that's really the key.
Yeah, so just on that, this is something that's actually been very close to our hearts at InterAccess, and we have had a couple of projects that unfortunately never really took off because of time constraints and whatnot. But we have over the years been looking at more serious efforts to work in this space on the accessibility of testing tools, because I think it's a massive problem. I think the industry itself needs to be more inclusive by supporting and employing people with disabilities in various capacities in it. I mean, if you look at what's happening in gaming now, gaming is a massive industry, and there are some games that are being produced, a lot of AAA games, which have fantastic levels of accessibility, and they've put some serious cash money into developing those environments in ways which are very sophisticated and not just, accessible content as an add-on or, some poor second cousin, but as a full stack citizen of the whole thing, like really, really interesting and innovative solutions for people who are gaming, who are maybe hard of hearing, who need audio descriptions in particular context, or people who are using haptic devices, which are motion, or people who have got poor color contrast or particular contrast requirements, so they need to have the environment rendered in a particular way. So there's a lot of really interesting innovation being done there. But this is a bit of a bugbear of ours as well, I guess, Brian, you could say, over the years, because we've been looking for tools that would work better. And well, who knows? Watch this space. It could be something we could do in the future if we're talking about future innovation.
Right. So, and also we are talking about Web3. This is a whole new space. Now, the question here for the audience is that are we considering making Web3 accessible? Because I haven't heard about accessibility in Web3 space. That includes probably NFTs, metaverse, digital assets, the exchanges, wallets, and there is so much out there that's the development that's happening in this space. So is that accessible? Is that being considered in mind? Because they say that Web3 is a community-based system. It's more diverse. It's more cultural. So we are not talking about accessibility.
Good.
Just to get the awareness out there is great, Charul. Even to do what we're doing now by sitting around talking about it.
Right.
Like people will listen to this and it'll come into their minds, which is really good.
You did good.
And back to me joining Workday, that's how I got aware of accessibility. And when I started getting deeper into accessibility education on it, I literally fall in love with this concept. And then I also tried to advocate it in NTA after I joined the team. But then also at the same time, I realized that how people within the organization are unaware of the actual concept and essence of accessibility. And that's what we all should put efforts in understanding. So I do see a gap there. And that's where InterAccess comes in, your knowledge, your wisdom. Comes in to help these organizations to support them in their journey of D&I that incorporates accessibility. People